Okay, well, hi everyone. My name is Sam. I run D&D Newbie Sessions, which is a community organization that consists of a network of meetup groups, specifically geared towards people that are interested in playing D&D for the very first time, or maybe becoming a dungeon master, or just being a part of a really friendly and welcoming D&D community. I'm here with David, aka DM David. Um, and David, you've been with the community for a while. Do you remember when you joined exactly?
I I don't. I mean, I kind of came in with a group of folks that were all playing in person, mostly in South Denver. And you started up this community. I think you started off with your meetup and your website. And then when you
Mm-hmm.
came over to Discord, then it just sort of started blowing up and COVID happened and the rest of us were kind of forced on online.
Mm-hmm.
I think I only first talked to you personally, maybe in person, like a few weeks ago,
Mm-hmm.
frankly. But
Yeah.
I think we've known of each other, or at least I knew of you because players in my games would go and play in your games, and then they'd always be like comparing DMs, which
Mm-hmm.
players do. But I think that's the nature of DMing to an extent is you know of other DMs, but you're so busy DMing your own games that you don't get to get around and meet everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I feel like it's been a while because I feel like the first event you hosted was quite a while ago. One of the first newbie sessions that you did as a meetup event.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's so I've been doing newbie sessions on my own for quite some time. I used to
okay.
go in to the Enchanted Grounds like board game store,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a guy that was running every Wednesday night. He was doing a newbie session. He was an employee there. He would just get off early and run a game, and that's kind of where I got into D&D in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But then once I started DMing, then I would show up sometimes and he would be out sick or something would have happened scheduling, and then we'd have like five or six people standing around, and so I would go and DM those games. And
Mm-hmm.
eventually I had my own sort of newbie sessions going there in person for a time. And then once we started doing COVID and lockdowns and all that business, then I started doing well, you reached out to me and said, "Hey, you want to host stuff on this meetup?" And I'm like, "Oh, sure, I'll do that." So I think I've done that four times, and I do it about once a month, kind of
Mm-hmm.
middle of the month. So it's been about 4 months or so.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, and I really I appreciate you doing that, and I really one of the things like once we finally had a chance to connect over like voice and video and stuff, I really appreciate you just have like such a calm, in control sort of demeanor, and you just seem like a natural like newbie teacher kind of like
Hmm.
you're good at this, and that's cool to see. I'm hoping that with the DM training program, like more we've find some more people like you that are good at this and interested in doing it. And we have such a demand, I feel like, for DMs. Like everyone wants to
Absolutely.
play, but no one necessarily wants to run a game.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always the bottleneck, I think, is DMs. If I wanted to start a game today with it, I could go write it, and within 24 hours, looking in the right places, I could easily find a set of five players, virtually at least,
Mm-hmm.
within for whatever schedule I want. In the middle of the night, they'll play. it's it's
Yeah,
so easy to find players. It's so hard to find DMs.
yeah, absolutely. Um, cool. Well, before we get right into the meat of this, just a couple other quick things. Number one, so the goal of this stream is to just have kind of a nice laid back conversation. I've got some questions for you, David, so we can get to know you. But otherwise, it's just kind of open and back and forth. This is the very first time we've ever done any sort of whatever this is, a podcast or web series or whatever this turns into. So it's a little bit of an experiment. We'll see how it goes. But we'll start with the first section here, which is some background questions for you. So you sort of already mentioned it, how you got into D&D and ultimately DMing. How long ago was that?
That was roughly 2 years ago.
Okay.
I actually haven't been playing comparatively that long, but I do get in a lot of games. So on a regular basis, from week to week, I DM about 2 to 4 games weekly, and I've
Nice.
been doing that for about 2 years.
Mhm.
Um, I have two regular campaigns that meet every Wednesday and Thursday. One of them started off as a Lost Mines of Fandelver out of the box campaign, and then they wanted to continue with those same characters, and so now they're like level 7 and going through the Stormlord's Wrath campaign.
Mhm.
Um, it's just a same extension of the same setting with Fandolin is still there. Um,
Mhm.
and then on Wednesdays, I run a group, or no, on Thursdays, I run a Humblewood group, which is a setting published by Deck of Many. And they're level 3 right now. And that group I started at the beginning of COVID when I
Mhm.
found myself having a little bit more time. And then on top of that, I do a monthly newbies group through your meetup. I do a monthly group with the people that I work with, just sort of a workplace D&D one shot.
Cool.
For those, we're doing the Dungeon in a Box series, which is a subscription box that gives you one shots.
Oh, okay.
Um, and then on top of that, I'll do kind of impromptu games whenever I've got a free Saturday or something, depending on the schedule and people available and what I'm feeling like doing or trying out. Those will always be one shots. Kind of tapped out as in terms of time commitment for campaigns because
Yep.
just running the two, I spend most of my Saturdays and Sundays probably 6 to 8 hours over the weekend prepping for those games on a
Mhm.
week to week basis. So I get in a lot of games within the 2 years that I've been doing this. I got started when some buddies of mine from church actually were going to the Enchanted Grounds newbie sessions that this one guy that I mentioned was running. His name was Ryan, and they were really enjoying themselves and like, David, you got to come and try this out. And they were saying this because I had a hobby or still have a hobby as an amateur writer. And so I had done National Novel Writing Month several years running. I'd written a bunch of my own stuff, never published anything, but I enjoyed writing fantasy and sci-fi and things like that. And so they're like, "You're gonna enjoy this. You gotta try. You gotta come do this, and then you gotta DM for us."
Mhm.
And so they sucked me into that. I got hooked fairly quickly, and largely got pulled into DMing because people would show up and not have a DM. And so I had my sort of trial by fire one shot. It was super nerve wracking and
Mhm.
and difficult. But once I had done that and got that first game under my belt, then I had already taken the bait and started doing my own stuff. So I've been doing that. I've been doing that ever since. Um, Mostly published content that eventually turns into a whole lot of homebrew. So,
Mhm.
while I've mentioned that I've done Humblewood and Stormlord's Wrath and a bunch of this other stuff, I heavily homebrew a lot of that stuff. I'll use it as a basis, as an inspiration, but roughly 50% of it I'll have rewritten myself by the time we actually play.
Mhm. Do you think do you think that becoming a DM just it's a certain type of person? Because when I hear you say that, like you people were looking for a DM and you just did a trial by fire. Like there's a lot of people that were in that same situation but didn't do it. Like,
Mhm.
do you think you're? I feel like maybe being a DM is it is a certain type of person that's just like, yeah, I'll do it. I'm just gonna try it and go into it. Um,
I think it requires a certain amount of courage. It requires a certain amount of creativity or drive. It certainly requires a lot of persistence
yeah.
and self motivation.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what happens with being a DM happens behind the curtain on your own time when
Hmm.
you are alone and nobody's looking. Um, it takes that kind of person to really continue with it. However, I don't know in terms of type of person, like what that person would look like. Because I've had players who played in my games and eventually I managed to strong arm them or encourage them into trying to DM for themselves.
Hmm.
And they're the whole gamut of types of people, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
So I don't know how I would like point at someone and say, "You look like a DM." I
yeah,
think they all come in different shapes and sizes, different personalities. I don't think that a lot of that really plays, into your getting into DMing, but it does take that persistence and that self motivation and a bit of creativity to continue to do it.
yeah. I guess what I'm saying is there's a certain mentality of like, I feel like becoming a DM, there's sort of a almost like a filter or something where it's like there's these roadblocks and challenges that sort of go along the
Hmm.
way, and then if you get through all of those things, like you mentioned, courage and persistence and some level of creativity and whatever else, you kind of have to break those barriers and then kind of come out the other side as a full fledged DM maybe. What do you think about that?
I agree, but I don't know that there is another side,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think that it's you're constantly on a journey of self improvement, and I think anyone who's a creative, be them a musician, a painter, a writer, they all understand this fairly well once they've been doing it for a while. In that, at no point do you say, "I've arrived.
Yeah, that's a
I,
good point.
I,
Yeah.
I'm done. I am the final form
Mm-hmm.
of my art." And D&D, particularly DMing, is an art. There's art to being a player too, but um, I think that you come into it and you kind of have to muddle around. At first, it's going to be clunky, and maybe at best, you'll get some of the rules right, or
Mm-hmm.
you'll have a decent story. But you get through it and you say, "Okay, that sucked. What can I do better?" And
Mm-hmm.
you're always your own worst critic. So you're always going to have that backlog of things. Oh, I should look into that. I need some better maps. I should work on finding a good map editor,
Mm-hmm.
or I need to work on, my players really want voices and I'd like to go in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go in those directions, which I think we can talk about later, but I think that at no point do you say, "I'm done." Yeah, you do reach a point where people start to call you out and say, David or Sam or so and so, they're a good DM. You can build a little bit of a reputation over
Mm-hmm.
time. You do have to run a lot of games to get there,
Yep.
but but I don't think you can ever say, I'm done being a better DM or working on my art,
Yeah.
because that's an essential part of the process.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think to echo that, I think when I first started being a DM, I sort of saw the activity of being a DM as just like running a board game that's a little more complicated. There was all these rules and just the kind of the technical piece of just like doing it. But as I've gotten further and further down the path, I'm starting to see it like that piece of it is sort of falling into the past because I've just sort of a lot of it's automatic now,
Mhm.
and I'm starting to recognize more of the artistic component where it's like I run a game and I don't have to think about that a lot of that other stuff anymore. Now I'm thinking so much more about just being in the moment and like navigating this labyrinth of player decisions and that piece of it is just unbelievably fascinating to me. I've never had anything like that in my life. I've never been a musician or an artist in any other capacity. And so like now as I'm starting to kind of get a glimpse of that, I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. There is something here that's just I've never seen it before, you know?
Yeah.
So it's really
And
exciting.
once you've learned that, then you'll find something else to work on. That's the beauty of it, is
Mm-hmm.
that this game can scale in so many different directions. It can go into the creative writing aspects of things. It can go into acting and improv and comedy. It can go into, um, if you're into painting, minis and maps and props.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's so many. It's a multimedia game without necessarily being a video game. and,
Yeah.
and so you can hook on to things, and it doesn't have to be the DM either. It can be the players that do this too, that say, I want to be more involved in this aspect or that aspect. And so you always have more to learn. That's why I say it's a journey. Like, at no point do you say, I'm done, I figured this out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love when absolutely I love when players come up with these really sort of, you can tell they've spent some time thinking about it and they're like, I want to do this really like specific thing in the game, or I'm like, yes, do that, because that, I'm sort of at a point where like, I built these one shots and I have a good structure and a lot of it's memorized, and I don't want to just run it over and over and over again
Right.
with the same, the same outcome or whatever. I want my players to throw things. I actually want them to throw things in there that throw me off, because it's
Right.
fun for me as to not know exactly what's going to happen. Which is a scary thing to say out loud, because I'm not encouraging that either in a way, but it is fun though.
Good.
Let's see. How many games do you think you've run so far, if you were to ballpark it?
If I were to ballpark it, um, I would say, just doing some quick math, 52 games or 52 days in a year, or 52 weeks in a year.
Yep.
Is that about right?
Yeah.
Times two. There's probably a few weeks in there that I missed a few due to holidays and things like that. So we can backfill with the meetups and the newbie sessions there.
Mm-hmm.
So, roughly 100 to 150.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I don't think I'm at the 100 mark yet. I think I'm a little under that, maybe 80,
Mm-hmm.
90 games. Which is crazy, because like it feels like a lot more, but then I go like count them sometimes, and I'm like, I've only run like 70 games. It feels like I've done so, but I think it's an illusion, because you do so much prep work for a game, so it feels
Right.
like more.
Right. It's
Yeah.
like saying that you built 100 houses.
Yeah.
It's just one house, but there's a lot of work to that.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And have you ever I know that out in the world there are some professional DMs that have actually gotten like paid to run games per hour and stuff. Have you ever done anything like that?
I have not. I've had some players who came to my games and they would tell me about games that they had gone to where it was a pay to play situation.
Okay.
Um, I have never charged anything for any of my games. I have set for the campaigns that I've run. I have set. Actually, I'll even limit it to just the one Humblewood campaign, because that's a different setting, and the players themselves need to be cognizant of what races are available, what class features are available, just to make their characters.
Mm-hmm.
I have set requirements on, if you want to play in this campaign, then you need to go buy the PDF at least
Mm-hmm.
of the setting. That's been, I will say, the only financial uh, entry for any game that I've ever run.
Okay. Yeah, I've never done anything like that either. I think it's interesting, but it also feels a little like it's hard for me to wrap my head around that. I just feel like that most people, when they think about paying to play like like a board game, just sounds like
Mm-hmm.
such a foreign concept in a way. Like you're not going to go pay to hourly to play Monopoly or something, right?
Right.
Um,
I think it's supply and demand.
mhm.
I mean, we talked about DMs to players. There are so many players that want to play this game,
Mhm.
particularly lately, and it's a matter of supply and demand. If the demand's there, people can charge a
Mhm.
little. I could see, you know, there's certain things that I think would be appropriate, like if you're hosting in a venue that that requires some sort of cover charge, or they expect you to purchase food or something like that,
Hmm.
then players should expect to do that. I think there's certain circumstances, like I mentioned with the Humblewood campaign, where there's going to be supplies that players are expected to go purchase on their own.
Hmm.
They should be bringing their own dice if you're playing with physical dice. Um, or at least a phone app or something.
Hmm. Yeah.
So there's expectations certainly on the player. I think as in terms of financial ones towards paying off the DM. I don't know, maybe if you're doing if if you're running events, I kind of see it as like there are people who get paid to go to like a company Christmas party and deal poker, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yep.
And it could certainly fit into a category, some sort of like event for a group that's like that. Same thing with Meetup. You have an option when you set up a Meetup event to say, here are dues, this is,
Hmm.
or here are the event costs. Um, there's lots of ways to do it. I think that if you're going to be a DM that charges, though, you need to do so. You need to be able to be a really good DM in terms
Yes.
of entertaining and making sure that people are having fun. Because where I started to hear about these guys were from players who were not necessarily satisfied with the experience, and yet DMs are so rare that I was the next DM they found.
Hmm.
So I think you have to be careful about that. You can't show up, and you have to treat it like a job at that point. You can't
Yeah.
show up and just chit chat. You need to make sure that everyone's having fun, and you're actually running the game.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of where the question was leading. I should probably preface this section or this question by saying I'm not planning on doing any of this. I was just I'm just kind of interested in it because
Hmm.
it seems like my initial reaction when I think about it is that it seems to be sort of a dated, like maybe a dated business model or something, possibly. Although I think that the more like corporate, like if you could maybe get a gig running a D&D game at like for a company event or something, that to me seems like okay, that could work.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, I guess though that what I was interested in is like, well, how would the experience change? What would the expectations be like if you're getting paid versus just doing it for free? And I think, like you're saying, you got to treat it like a job. You've got to be professional. You've got to, you know, you probably got to spend more time planning, maybe like, or making sure it's really, really polished. Um, Probably also just have to have the level, just make sure you've got like a ton of experience under your belt, kind
Right.
of so you can handle, virtually every circumstance that could arise in a entertaining way or whatever.
Yeah, it's like hosting any kind of party on a paid basis.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you got to concern yourself with the venue. You got to concern yourself with everything.
Mm-hmm.
Have all the materials that they need. They show up, they do their thing. Um, you are basically for providing a service for entertainment. You're in the entertainment industry. It's no longer a hobby, I think, when you're being paid.
Yeah, yeah,
And you
absolutely.
just got to treat it accordingly.
Yeah, cool. Um, okay, so here's another one. How and maybe I don't know, maybe we've already answered this, but how do you feel like D&D has affected your life just in general? Like, what sort of impact has it had? Why is it important to you? Why have you stuck with it? Like some people could pick this up and just play a little bit and then move on to a different board game or a different hobby or something. Like what has stuck with you?
I think for me it's three things. It's a creative outlet. I have a huge creative itch that
Mm-hmm.
I constantly am looking for ways to address, and be it with writing or writing code or drawing or 3D printing, or I've always this is me. This is a big part of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for me, just being able to have this outlet is useful. You come home at the end of the day, you've spent a long day at work doing something boring or sitting in meetings, and
Mm-hmm.
this is a great way to get that escapism feeling that that you need just to de-stress.
Mm-hmm.
I think the second thing, it's a social life. I'm not a very extroverted person. I've learned to be extroverted on a case by case basis over a couple hours.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I need to go home and curl up in the fetal position afterwards, but for me, it's a way that I can interact with people and share something that is enjoyable for everyone and still be quite happy about it afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Lastly, it's about sharing. So I mentioned that I had been doing a lot of writing prior to this. So I had, with National Novel Writing Month is or NaNoWriMo is a nonprofit sort of. It's kind of like a writing marathon every November, where you go and write 50,000 words in a month of a novel.
Mm-hmm.
And to give context to that, the first Harry Potter was like 68,000 words. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
it's almost like the first Harry Potter in a month, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done that several times now. I've got the equivalent of several Harry Potters worth of stories and books and long form novels, short stories, content that I got done with it, and it was a first draft sort of thing. And you can share that with some people, but sometimes you get mixed results, and it is a nerve wracking experience to share it with people, because it could be that it could be great, but they just don't. It's not their kind of thing. You wrote sci-fi and they wanted romance or something like that,
Yeah.
but or vice versa, or any other combination of genres. It's hard to get your mileage out of that without really investing in your writing and getting it polished, getting a line at it, getting lots of beta reviewers, and then going through that process. And to me, that was never all that important. It was more the creative process.
Mm-hmm.
I liked to make something and then stick it out there for the world to see. That's where D&D kind of comes in spades. I mean, so
Yeah.
I can do some writing and share it with people within a day, you know,
Mm-hmm.
or in a long-term campaign, there can be something that's really interesting that happens that the players don't see, and I can go and write it up as maybe a dream that like the cleric got from their deity,
Mm-hmm.
or something like that, and I give it to them as a handout, and people love it. So it's a way of sharing and having a social experience with other people, um, regardless of COVID. I mean, it's how it's always been for me. um, it's a creative outlet. And then I think lastly, I'll also say, I guess there's a fourth thing in that, I've seen D&D become um, a huge positive impact for a lot of the players. So there is sort of an altruistic community service sort of feel to it, in a
Mm-hmm.
sense,
Yeah.
even when you run a bad game. um, I've had a lot of players who um, they are laid off from their jobs, or short of work. They don't, and aside from putting in resumes, they don't have a lot of stuff going on in their weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And so, particularly lately. And so, having the one night a week to say, this is, we're at Wednesday now,
Mm-hmm.
and something that they're excited about to go and play this game has been a huge uplifting thing for them. Um, I've played with people who are stay-at-home mothers, and that's a big job in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And this is their one set aside social activity that they do, every week. aside from, date night or whatever.
Hmm.
But and they look forward to this kind of stuff. And I get texts and DMs in Discord of, just they're thinking about the story, they're thinking about their characters, they're thinking about the what ifs, and it's the excitement and the creativity is carrying them throughout the week.
Hmm.
And I see that, and I think that's worth sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I definitely echo everything you just said. What's is there anything like this other than D&D? Because like what you just described is to me so interesting. It's so interconnected between the DM and the players and the creativity and just what it provides. Like, can you? I've been trying to think of this just here and there. Like, because I'll get questions from people who've never played, and they're like, "What's D&D like?" And I've done my best to say, "Well, you roll some dice, and it's like a story you're kind of building together." And I've tried explaining it in different ways, but I feel like I've never truly successfully explained D&D to anyone. Like it's always falls short. Is there anything out there in your mind that D&D is, if you were like it's like that, they would go into the game with a pretty strong understanding?
I I start all of my newbie sessions with kind of the same script,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems to communicate, at least the way I see D&D, fairly well. It goes like this. I say D&D is a group storytelling experience, and in which the players are in charge of characters, and the DM is in charge of the world and other characters. Um, because we want the story to be somewhat realistic, we need to put in a few game elements. If we all got together and just started telling a story together, it could be a little chaotic. You got to have that talking stick in a
Mm-hmm.
way. So there's some rules to the game, and it is treated like a game, but at its core, it is a storytelling experience because that is the ultimate result or artifact that comes out of what we're building here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when we the other thing is that we need to keep ourselves realistic. So if Harry Potter were to show up and do and say all the right things all the time, it would make for a really short book. Right?
Right.
And it wouldn't be all that entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so what we do is we incorporate things like dice. And whenever your characters want to do something in the world that requires any kind of difficulty or possible risk or of a potential for failure, you roll dice. Most of the time, it's going to be a d20. And if you meet a certain number that the DM, who is in charge of the world, has in his head, his or her or whoever's head, they then you succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's due to the story and your character, if you're a strong character and you're doing something that a strong character would do well at, like, lifting a car or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
or if you're an intelligent character and you're researching something, then we will modify your dice roll to be a little bit higher to accommodate those circumstances. And if you are a particularly stupid character, maybe we'll modify it to the negative a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we end up telling a story that is entertaining, realistic, and has a lot of failures and conflict in it. And it's from those failures and conflict that we will get the entertainment, because people get excited when the hero or the protagonist comes in and doesn't quite get it the first time, and they have to try different things, and that it turns on our problem solving skills,
Mm-hmm.
and it excites our imaginations as well. So together we are able to create this story where your heroes are able to overcome setbacks, and together we will enjoy this story and be able to share it amongst ourselves and our friends going forward, and it'll be an actual thing.
Hmm.
That alone, that description, yeah, I don't exactly have it written out word for word, but I've done it so many times
Hmm.
that people really seem to jive with that, and it seems to explain that there are elements of story and the game.
Hmm.
You know, this is not, if you show up to a group activity with six people where one person determines whether or not you succeed or fail, and you're trying to get some sort of game breaking personal validation.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's not a static environment. I could be having a bad day and you fail at everything. You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
don't put yourself in that situation. But if you show up and you say, let's tell a good story, let's have fun and a good experience together, then that's really what D&D is supposed to be about. It's
Hmm.
just people having fun.
Yeah. 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 Definitely. And so you mentioned, I kind of jump forward a little bit. You mentioned the importance of the experience. That there is an element of having structure to it. So it's just not maybe inconsistent or chaos or something like that. And we had that
Mhm.
conversation a couple weeks ago with Matt about the two of you are sort of not quite on extreme ends or anything, but you're definitely on different. You're definitely a little bit on different ends from each other. You are, at least in my mind, you are more focused on the the experience and creating a collaborative story and stuff like that. And I think you're more open to maybe making things up a little bit or being flexible with the rules and stuff if it benefits the drama and the fun and stuff like that. And
Right.
Matt sort of made the point where he's like, well, he comes, I think, from that background of Adventurers League, and I think in that community, it seems like we gotta obey the rules because otherwise there's just there's no consistency. It's chaos. No, you can't go from game to game with any real expectations. And I think there's a valid point there. And then I sort of I originally definitely found myself more on your end. I thought the experience of D&D was why I was there, why it was important to me is just the fun of it and stuff like that. But as I've also been running more meetup events, I feel like there's some level of responsibility on my side because I'm sort of influencing people at this point of like coming in, there's first experience, and I'm thinking like, I don't know, like, is it okay for me to like have some house rules or bend the rules? Like, I don't, so I'm actually like find myself right now kind of in the middle and a kind of torn about what I should be doing.
Hmm.
And I want to make, like, I don't want D&D Newbie Sessions to be like Adventurers. Like, I don't want it to be like, hey, everybody's got to follow the rules. We've got to all be super consistent. Like, that doesn't feel right to me. And I don't think that's what the majority of players want. And it's just personally not what I want. But I do still find myself torn. I don't know. Do you have anything to add to
Well,
that?
so here's the thing. You actually sent me this question in advance, and I just
Mm-hmm.
want to read the way that you had worded it there.
Okay.
You were asking, is story slash experience more, less, or equally important to upholding the rules?
Mm-hmm.
That was the original question, and that's the basis of it, but you've expanded it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll say, from my experience, even though anyone who's heard the beginning of this podcast discussion video will say, oh, he's going to totally say story and experience trumps everything.
Mm-hmm.
My actual answer is none of the above,
Oh,
which
okay.
is not the same as equally important.
Okay.
It is none of the above because everyone is different.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I are more story-oriented folks, and we expect or think in terms of story. We appreciate that. Matt, the other DM that we were talking to a few weeks ago in the Newbie Sessions Discord, he comes from more of a game-focused background, it seems, and so he can see things a little bit differently. And I have played enough games with enough players to realize that there are people who are coming to D&D from an improv, drama, storytelling, writing background, and
Mm-hmm.
then there are people who are coming to it from a board game, um, video game sort of, it's a game
Mm-hmm.
background,
Yep.
and neither of them is wrong. The whole point of D&D is not to be one thing, it's to fulfill what's called the social contract. And if you haven't heard of this, I highly encourage you to go Google it. D&D social contract or tabletop social contract or RPG social contract, any of those in YouTube or Google or whatever search engine you want. There's tons of content on this. And yet, I think it's probably the biggest hole in people's understanding of D&D.
Hmm.
And the social contract, it just in quick synopsis is just the idea of it is that it's an unspoken agreement between everyone involved, the players, the DM, that we're here to have fun. And it's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you show up and say, we're going to play a game and it's going to be a dungeon crawl and there's risk of a TPK and it's going to be a challenge and we're going to see if we can get through it all, and we're going to stick to the rules for everything and try and model the world as close as we can. That's one type of group for a type of person.
Mm-hmm.
If you say, you know what, we're going to have some combat in there, but it's going to be more for storytelling experience. If you want to try something goofy, in one of the games in my Humblewood game last week, my players were fighting mountain lions, and one player who was playing a mouse race,
Mm-hmm.
that's like 2 feet tall, decided to jump up on top of a mountain lion and mount it during combat. And so um, that's you know that's probably not the smartest thing to do,
Mm-hmm.
but for storytelling it was great and we had a lot of fun with it. So nobody's wrong. You just need to manage expectations and make sure that everyone's on the same page there,
Mm-hmm.
because if you have people who are expecting one thing and getting another, then that's where the dissonance comes from. So that's kind of how I go about doing that. As a DM, I think there's strategies for managing those expectations.
Mm-hmm.
When I post a new game, I will put in, I'll give a little intro of this is the type of DM that I like. These are the things that I like. These are the things that I don't like. But I'll also, because every adventure is different, I'll put in kind of an RP versus combat um, ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm doing something that's a straight dungeon crawl, you're going to talk to one NPC, get a quest, go into a dungeon and kill a bunch of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'll say it's going to be 80% combat and 20% roleplay, something like that, so that I can manage those expectations up front. I think that having a session zero for a large campaign is absolutely essential if you
Mm-hmm.
want that campaign to last for very long.
Yeah.
I think that finding people, when I build a group for a campaign, I treat it kind of like dating. I kind of think that people who go out and they say, I'm looking for a long-term campaign with a group of people, and they're sifting through strangers in Discord,
Mm-hmm.
they're looking for trouble. And I think that down the line we're going to see a whole lot of people well, even today I meet a ton of players who, when I talk to them, I say, well, let's play a game. What have you not seen of the published content? And they say, well, I've seen the first dungeon of Lost Mines of Fandelver, I've seen the first thing of Icespire Peak, I've seen the first thing of all this other stuff. And it's from all these campaigns they started up and they didn't get past one or two sessions.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody has seen the beginning of all the published content eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of sad. So like when I started up Humblewood, I really wanted it to last. And
Yeah.
I hosted one shots until I had a group of 5 folks that were showing up consistently, and they
Yeah.
had good chemistry and they played well together. And for the last 2 or 3 one shots that I ran, it was the same 4 people, but that 5th person is the cursed fifth seat. They just kept,
Mm-hmm.
someone would show up, they would not jive with the group, or the timing was not good, or they just really didn't have the time to dedicate to the game, and then they'd leave. And so it did take us 5 one-shots roughly to get 5 people that would consistently show up. And now we've been running consistently week to week to week to week
Mm-hmm.
for several months. I think we're on session 13 now with that.
Cool. So yeah, so then so you have the rules side and you've got the story side, and kind of what you're saying is play to your audience, get to know them, do the session zero, make sure you understand what set expectations and stuff
Exactly.
like that.
Yep.
So in a way, what you're saying is if you go in with the right understanding, you can have a successful game regardless of the if the players are rule focused or story focused and stuff like that, or maybe have some sort of compromise, a hybrid or something.
Sure.
So let's say that from the DM's perspective, you're thinking long term about your own skill set. I do feel like there's an element of like where you spend your energy, right? Like I could, if let's say I wanted to be more rules focused, I could spend more time with Adventurers League or something, or I could spend more time studying story experience, right? You have limited time and effort and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that it's do you think you have to make a choice at some point? Like I can, at a basic level I can kind of satisfy everyone, but I'm going to be you're going to be somewhere on that spectrum. Um, yeah, like in terms of your long-term skills.
You have to determine where you place your energies. There's an economy of your attention. You only have so much time to prep or to work on your craft. So you do need to say, I want to focus on being better at NPC dialogue, or I want to
Mm-hmm.
focus on learning to run combat better,
Mm-hmm.
which is usually involved in rules.
Yeah.
I want to focus on. So again, you're on a journey. Pick one thing and focus on that. But also, I'll give some advice as to new DMs in that you cannot focus on everything all at once. And you cannot focus on getting better as a DM without running games.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to continue to run games. It's the same thing with that I've seen with writing. I used to go to all these writing meetups, and people would be there to get feedback on their writing. And there were some writers that showed up with the same 3 paragraphs every week. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like you haven't written anything else. You're just looking for more validation, or
Mm-hmm.
you're looking for more stuff. And then some of those folks would spend thousands on going to classes and webinars and podcasts and study material, and they wouldn't actually practice their craft,
Mm-hmm.
or they would do so very little. I think that, again, whether you're a DM, a player, an artist, a musician, any of those things, you need to draw a balance between getting better at your craft and actually doing your craft. And I think that you need to economize your time in order to support that as best as you can. And the other thing to realize, so that was one piece of advice. Another piece of advice is if you are more of a creative type, you don't you need to know the rules enough that when people show up to your 5e game that you've listed,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever system you're running, that it still looks and feels like 5e.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the big argument in favor of rules, is there's that consistency. You can have people come in from time to time who have never played before or who haven't played in years, and the game is still the same.
Yeah.
If you have a group that's your own group where the players aren't changing, you can do all kinds of stuff. In my Stormlord's Wrath, formerly Lost Mines of Fandelver campaign, I went and rewrote the entire lore and monster stat blocks and everything for all things lycanthrope. I wanted some werewolves in there, but I didn't like how Wizards of the Coast had done them.
Mm-hmm.
I rewrote. It took about 4 pages worth of just straight up word text,
Mm-hmm.
but I rewrote everything involved with that. The role of Donabella, or Wolfsbane, the whole system, how it affects them. I wanted it to feel more like an ailment or a serious disability, and yet people still had themselves. They could still be themselves. So more based off of kind of what you see in like paranormal romance novels involving werewolves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wanted something more like that because I had some characters that I wanted to be lycanthropes, some NPCs, and I wanted my players to interact with them more and to experience this a little bit more in depth rather than just going onto the battlefield and killing them all,
Mm-hmm.
as treating them as monsters to be
Yeah.
slain. And so I can get away with that in my campaign. It's a little bit more difficult to do that in a newbie sort of campaign or one
Mm-hmm.
shot where you don't know who's going to be showing up. So you have the freedom to do whatever homebrew you want. You need to compensate for if it's open to the public. You need to publish those things. Have handouts or something
Mm-hmm.
to explain what are the differences between standard 5e and what you're doing. And then lastly, like you can also accept that you're not perfect when you're DMing. So this is now to a third piece of advice
Mm-hmm.
because I am stream of consciousness
That's okay.
doing this. The third piece is you can recognize that maybe you're not a rules person, but
Mm-hmm.
if you have someone in your group that is, then you can sort of say, look, I'm going to focus on the story, and the story is going to win whenever there's a conflict. And if that's okay with you, manage your expectations. It could be that that's not okay with them and it's just not the right group for them, and best of luck to them.
Mm-hmm.
but I have in my Stormlord Wrath campaign, I have some players who really love to look stuff up in the book,
Mm-hmm.
and so I rely on them heavily to look stuff up whenever we need it. And I'm not afraid to say, what does your spell do? you
Mm-hmm.
know what's how do we manage the mouse jumping on the back of the mountain lion?
Yeah.
What? And the thing is, if it were up to me, I'd say roll a d20. Your mouse is probably kind of dexterous, so add +2 or something, or whatever
Mm-hmm.
your dexterity is. I would invent something on the fly, and I think that's totally 100% reliable and
Mm-hmm.
legit. That's your backup. If you look on the back of the standard DM screen, there's a chart for like on the fly improv DCs,
Mm-hmm.
and they say, if it's something that you as the DM think is stupid easy, it's a 1 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
Pick a number. If it's a little bit harder, then it's a 6 to 10. If it's straight up, impossible, 40. you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
and that's totally allowable as a DM, which I don't think a lot of people realize. You can fudge so much
Mm-hmm.
as a DM. And yet if the rules are going to be important, if someone really wants to look that up, let them. Let people be involved.
Yeah.
So I have players who sit there with the a stack of books and they're looking stuff up as we play along.
Yeah.
And that's more involvement for them. So you don't have to be this 100% control freak that knows everything.
Mm-hmm.
There's nobody has that expectation. And I think that that's going to be, particularly for someone running their first session,
Yeah.
that should be comforting to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Cool. Let's see here. Is there anything that you've done recently that I don't know, like something something kind of experimental. Like it sounds like you since you're okay with kind of being flexible in the moment and doing kind of what makes just sense or what's dramatic and stuff. Is there anything that stands out to you in games you've run that's just pretty wild or out there that you recall? I know it's kind of putting you on the spot. It's maybe like hard to think, pull that out,
Well,
but
in my case, it's hard to pick out what I haven't done because I've done a lot of goofy experimental stuff.
okay.
I've written one shots from scratch just to explore an idea. Um, I'll say so. There was the whole lycanthrope thing. Totally rewrote all that. Um, I have. I didn't like the way that Wizards of the Coast had done or explained downtime.
Hmm.
And that was a big deal in the Stormlord's Wrath. There's a lot of downtime involved. And part of that particular campaign is building or rebuilding this settlement out of ruins. And so the crafting system and eventually having your own store and hirelings, those are pages in the DM's guide that not a lot of people get to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And suddenly those were paramount for me. And so I came up with my own system for that. I went and found a crafting system off of DM's Guild that I went through tons of crafting systems, and finding one that was universal, not just gem crafting or tailoring or something like that, but universally applicable was really difficult for me. But I found one that I liked and tailored it to my needs. So that's, a deviation from 5e. We have a whole like word form for crafting stuff. It's like, do I have the components? Do I have the time? Do I have the expertise? And then it builds up this sort of formulaic dice roll formula of, roll like 6d6, add 2 this, depending on your answers. In a one shot that I wrote from scratch, I replaced the death save system with the death system from the movie Jumanji. I just said, you don't get death saves. If you hit 0, you die. And then there's a chime that rings throughout the sky, and you fall from the sky at full hit points again.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And all the characters had little marks on their forearms, just like in the movie.
Yeah.
And I had monsters that would one-shot you. And that was eye-opening to a lot of players. I've done a lot of crazy stuff, and I think as long as you explain it well and say, here's the deviations from the base rules, people really enjoy that stuff. It's a breath of fresh air for them.
Yeah. I could see that. That sounds like a pretty fun, interesting mechanic that would change. It would definitely change like the normal style of play. If you knew like I could do something really dangerous and sacrifice myself to maybe save someone because I know I'm going to come back and I'll still have a couple lives left. That's a different game of D&D. That's cool. Okay, so here's a question or something that I've been mulling over is, and I feel like I maybe I just need to do more research, but I haven't gotten a satisfying answer to this yet. So when players in my game roll a critical 20 on a weapon attack, I give them maximum damage with the weapon, as opposed to the normal rule, which is to roll an additional damage die. And I've done the math on it. Like I went a spreadsheet and I like mapped it out and got the averages and stuff. And basically what happens is in that system, if you just give them max damage, so if let's say they had a weapon that does 1d8 plus 3, they just automatically do 11 damage. Because in my mind, what's happening with a crit 20 is when you get a crit 20 on your weapon attack, it's like the perfect strike. It's doing the most amount of damage that the weapon could possibly do. And that's the way that it makes logical sense to me. Whereas like you could in the other system get a crit 20 and do less damage than max damage with the weapon, and that doesn't make sense to me. So I've always had this kind of had this house rule That's what crit 20 does. And what ends up happening, if you do the math, is that the average amount of damage in my system will always, well, I don't know if it's always, but it's very close to about one hit point less than the other system. So you could theoretically do one additional hit point on average with the core rules. So that's sort of the conundrum. The conundrum is, do I continue doing that? Because like I mentioned at the beginning, the reason I'm asking some of these this like story versus rule questions is because I'm running a meetup, a bunch of meetup games, and sort of influencing people, and I'm wondering if I'm doing the right thing. Like, should I be finding these house rules that I've just kind of like always done and eliminating them? Or is that fair? Is it okay for me to do something like that, you know?
Do whatever is fun for you and fun for your players. It comes down to that social contract. If you're all having fun, you win. You know, case closed.
Yeah.
I'll say, if you want to get into the nitty gritty of things, there is such a thing as monsters that can have the equivalent of an AC of 20, right? And so in order to hit them in the first place, they had to crit. And, you know, that's the battle. That's how it was designed. It could be, if you ever have to run something like that, then suddenly it's like, if you hit, then you're always doing max damage. And that could mess up those niche cases. And I do think they are niche, but you're not going to see that in tier 1 D&D, you know, levels 1 to 5 sort of stuff.
Yeah, but what do you think about what do you think about that as a rule? Like, or actually even better, like, when you get a crit 20 on your weapon attack, like, what does that actually mean to you? Because I feel like it's not really explained anywhere. That it just says, like, you know, roll an extra damage die, you got a critical hit, but it doesn't really say like what you're imagining is happening. Like, why is that even a thing, you know?
You know, some players are going to be into the imagining thing. I, for a while, had a house rule where if you got the killing blow, then you had to narrate the death of that character.
Okay.
I know I've tried different things, but I think that you can do a lot of different. You can change things or manage your group in different ways. That, you know, they can make crits exciting if that's your goal. If you've looked at your DM prep time and said, oh, I've got this stuff to do for the actual session, and I've got to import all these assets into Astral and this and that, and then I've got a little bit of time to work on just improving my DM process. If you're thinking, what I want to work on this week is making crits more exciting, then give it a try, you know? And you are the DM. You have all the creative power to do whatever you want. So as long as you can explain it up front and say, this is how this is going to work, so that you're not having any nasty surprises, you know, mid game. Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay, so but how would you? So the way I describe a crit 20 is, it's like a perfect weapon strike. You manage to pull off like the maximum amount of damage that weapon could do. If that's not what it does, then what does it do? Like, what would be the description in your mind?
In this case, it's, again, you manage to. I see the crit 20 as not being attached to the damage, frankly.
Okay.
You know, it's your roll for hit, and your damage calculation is done with the dice. So if you as a DM want to say, okay, you do max damage, then that's fine. And if you want to say roll an extra dice, then that's fine. Frankly, I would lean more towards rolling extra dice because players like rolling dice.
True.
It's a phenomenon that I don't quite understand as a full-time DM. I have one set of dice somewhere around here. Right here. This is my one set of dice that I use for everything, and my players have hundreds of dice, and they're like, which one am I going to try now? And so given, I
Yeah.
will find stuff for them to roll on for the sake of making them happy, because that's
Yeah.
part of
Yeah.
the social contract.
Yep.
So however you want to do that, I think, is as long as you are balancing it out with your encounters, so they're not one-shotting everything, then you're fine. So I mean, one question I would say is, are you as a DM showing players the health bars up front?
Hmm.
Do they, when they go in, are they able to, there's a toggle for this in Astral at
Yep.
least.
Yep.
um, and sometimes I'll show them the health bars, sometimes I won't. And if I won't, then it's usually because I'm not sure that I've balanced the combat just right. And that's a reality of life. I don't have all the time in the world to get everything perfect up front.
Yeah.
But I will sometimes turn off the health bars. And when they say, well, is he bleeding? How's he looking? I'll tell them that they're bleeding when they're about half health. But I might be tweaking the health pools like after round one,
Hmm.
just to, oh, they hit really hard. We've got to give all these guys some more health.
Hmm.
Otherwise, we're going to have a really boring combat. So,
Yeah.
again, that's a way that I try and manage the fun of the game and the story um, over rules. I'll fudge health pools from time to time.
Hmm.
Not always, but usually, if it's a big boss battle, I do not want them to come in and just one shot the boss, unless it's an extraordinary circumstance where they
Yeah.
just happen to roll that crit right off the bat and have all the stars align.
Hmm.
Then that can make for a really cool story. In
Yep.
which case, sure, one shot the boss, because everyone's going to be talking about that for the next week.
Yeah.
I'm investing in people's happiness, investing in people's enjoyment and their entertainment. So
Hmm.
however I get there, whether it's through good storytelling or fudging some dice or some health pools or something like that, that's the goal.
Okay. Cool. And then we kind of, you actually sent a video like a week ago about this, about DM anxiety. What's your experience with anxiety leading into games, running games, maybe possibly after games? Like, what do you think?
I think it's a lot of what we've already been talking about. It's you are your own worst critic,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of us are not necessarily super extroverted. It doesn't come second nature to a lot of us. And I'll say that after 100 to 150 games, the anxiety does not go away at all. I mean, I think every game that I've run, at some point that day, I've thought, how can I get away with calling in sick or
Right. Yeah.
something?
Yeah. I think.
At least a fleeting thought.
Yeah.
And there's always the worry of, particularly in long form campaigns, because you don't want to prepare everything, or else you could be just railroading
Mm-hmm.
your players through the published content. But you don't want to prepare too little, or you're just improvising for the next 4 hours.
Yeah.
So finding that balance and worrying, have I done too much? Have I done too little? Have I prepared a bunch of stuff? Have I done a bunch of world building on a portion of the world that the players are not going to go to? You might spend hours fleshing out this city, and then at the start of the campaign, the ranger is like, let's go over that mountain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have nothing for the mountain, and you have everything for the city.
Yep.
The anxiety does not go away. And some people struggle with actual, diagnosed anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not to belittle any of them. I'm not talking I mean, that's an issue in and of itself. But
Yep.
for all of us, there's those worry stones that you have to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
And I found some videos talking about that, and I think that it's a topic that should be talked about more, particularly among new DMs, because a lot of people are getting into D&D, and a lot of the DMs out there, they learn to DM in a vacuum on their own with maybe just their friends or their siblings or someone.
Yep.
And so everyone's different. Everyone's learned. Again, coming back to D&D is not one thing. It's whatever is enjoyable for the players and for the DM included. So I think that there's a lot of anxiety going into those first couple of games, and realizing that you do not need to be Matt Mercer. You know, you do not need to come in swinging with a great story and voices and everything's planned out. You do not need to prep for days on end to run a one shot. You know, you do not need to define the world at large for just to host a dungeon. Knowing where to kind of draw the line and say, I've done enough, and then going and sitting with your players and having that social contract established, whether it's unspoken or it's established in writing. I've seen it in writing sometimes, actually looking like a contract sometimes in a session 0 for a long-term campaign. And having those expectations managed is paramount for managing your own anxiety, because then you can say, this is what is expected of me, and this is what I am expecting of the players. And these are the rules that we can break. These are the rules we should not break. And I think there's a lot of, it just comes down to the expectation management. If you've got that in place, it's still, again, the anxiety doesn't go away, but it gets so much more manageable at that point.
Yeah. I always feel like there's definitely a part of my brain that I'm not in control of, which is like, I know that I can do this, I know that I can run games and stuff like that, but there's always that piece of me that's, as the game's coming up, I'm like, oh, maybe it'll get canceled, or maybe I'll feel sick or something. Like it never goes away. There's always that piece of you that's like, run away. What are you doing? And it's kind of interesting that, one thing that's helped is running games more frequently, for sure. Because I definitely felt more anxiety when I was doing once a week initially. Like every week it would be like Wednesday after work, and I'd like feel pretty anxious. Like I was similar to like, back in school, you're going to give a presentation in front of the class or something, and you're like that. And I'm like, come on, man. I'm like, 32 years old, like, get over it. But it doesn't, you're right. It doesn't really go away. And you just have to, for me, it's just a matter of just reminding myself, like, it's going to be fine. You do it. The worst case, there's you can tell yourself, worst cases, they're not really, no one's going to die. It's not that big of a deal.
Sure.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. I think you're right. I think it should be talked about more. I mean, that kind of just goes, I think, hand in hand with a general, like a broader sort of societal thing, which is like, hey, mental health's a real thing. We should all just talk about it more, be open about that kind of stuff.
Well, and players will appreciate the DMs more if they understand a little bit of what they're doing. I think a lot of players show up to particularly newbie sessions because they're newbies. They have no clue how much prep you put in on the weekend to get that together, or what all the writing was, or what it took to get the writing in place and the systems in place and maps and minis and all this other stuff that you've set up. And oh man, the bane of my existence, uploading everything to Astral.
I know, it's so slow.
It takes so long to get everything set up for a virtual campaign, at least in my case, because I came from an in-person background.
Yeah. I love, actually, every once in a while, it doesn't happen very, very frequently, but every once in a while I get like a player who will recognize that. They'll be like, I know how much work it goes in, so I like appreciate you running newbie games and stuff. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could just hug you right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's another kind of question I wanted to ask you, get your thoughts on here is, um, what do you think about like real life activities like stand up comedy or an improv class or uh, like LARPing or historical reenactment. I even just like this is so super random, but like I've wanted to like just go like uh, ride a wagon in the woods pulled by horses because I think there is some sort of interesting like that only exists in my mind. I've never
Mm-hmm.
done that. And I keep thinking about like I should do more real life things that ultimately sort of create an experience that I can then use in D&D. Have you ever done anything like that or considered anything like that?
I think that's so there's two parts to this. I think that a lot of that, what you suggested, fits into the category of I have so much time to prepare for games. I
Mm-hmm.
still need to run the games, and then I have a little bit of time to work on myself as a DM.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, they're going to say, I'm going to work on voice acting, or I'm going to work on having better battle maps, or finding better one-shot stories to run, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then other people will say, I'm going to work on the social aspect of DMing, and I'm going to do some improv or some acting or voices or something.
Mm-hmm.
and and you have to prioritize what's important to you. Think about what are you worst at. Recognize that you do not need to necessarily make what you're worst at what you're best at,
Mm-hmm.
but where do I need to patch the holes, and where can I amplify the things I'm good at? And that's, again, we do not all need to be Matt Mercer.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find your own voice, your own flavor. That's something that in writing we actually talk about quite a bit, is finding your writing voice. And this is something that writers will struggle with and anguish over for a long, long time, because you'll find something that works for you, that comes to it just flows better, the way it's kind of your narrator voice and the way that you write.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll go read or listen to an audiobook, some other author, and then you'll see something that you liked, and you'd be like, I want to do that. And when you pull it into your own style, your own voice, it's a mess. you know um me writing my stuff with my style, and then trying to pull in some of the voicings and dialogue from Mark Twain.
Mm-hmm.
It looks and feels wrong, right? Because it's totally different authors, different voices.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, I might be able to massage that into place where there's a blend of me and Mark Twain, but it would be, and maybe that's the direction I want to take my voice.
Mm-hmm.
It could be that it takes it in a bad direction as well.
Yeah.
So you do need to. This is part of being a creative. This is part of. It's something that musicians and artists and creatives and DMs and all of them alike will struggle with finding your style. You
Mm-hmm.
see this to come to think of it, you see this a lot in artists as well, finding their style. Every artist has a particular style that is attributed to them. You look at a Van Gogh and you can say that looks like a Van Gogh painting. You look at to draw it back to D&D, um, look at some of the stuff from Jess Jackdaw. She's a cartoonist artist, Photoshop painter that does a lot of D&D monsters, and she'll do like Pokemon D&D mashups and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at that stuff, you can sort of guess that that's maybe if you know of her, you can say that looks like a Jess Jackdaw sort of drawing.
Mm-hmm.
Fine, that's her voice, right? And so, however you go about finding that voice, um, maybe it's that you need more personal experiences. I'll say one time I tried writing a short story about a man who he had 3 kids, and his wife had passed away, and it was sort of a tragedy. And I got done. I thought it was pretty good, and I sent it to some friends to read, and they're like, "This is absolute trash. You have no idea what you're talking about. You've never been married. You have no kids." And it's just so there is some merit in experiencing, like you said, the wagon on a trail sort of
Hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
And doing so, I think you might be able to describe it a little bit better. But on the same token, you also need to draw the line with, I do not need to go become a serial killer IRL
Right.
in order to write a horror slasher story.
Hmm.
There are lines to be drawn.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and it all comes down to just prioritizing. Where is your time spent best?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, just to push on that a little bit more, because I guess what I'm thinking of is sort of like the vision quest type of thing, like going off and doing very specific kind of like you're manufacturing an experience to then draw like inspiration from it and draw like so that when you go back to the table you're like I mean the riding on a wagon in the woods, that's just a very simple illustration of that, where it's like now I know what
Mm-hmm.
it feels like, I know how slow it is, I know what it's like to sit behind the horse as it's being drawn, and I know what the the wagon bouncing around and stuff, and like being deep in a forest, like
Mm-hmm.
is that eerie, or is it kind of cool, or like yeah, and I get what you're saying. There's sort of you have limited time, and is that really worth it? Just so you could in one sentence explain it slightly better than another DM or something.
Sure.
But
So are
that's kind
your
of where it's
players
coming
into
from.
that?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
this, are you into it? If you're into it, do it, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. That
this
maybe
is for
that's.
you.
Yep. Yep.
But will people appreciate that? I've known DMs who go up and for their hook on a one shot, their intro, they will read 6 pages of stuff, and they're super excited about giving the lore and background of the kingdom.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the players are just like, "Can I hit stuff yet? Uh, can I
Yes.
roll my dice?"
Yep. Yeah.
So that it's, if you want to do it, do it.
Yeah.
And there's going to be value in all those things if you do them right.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it just comes down to prioritization and balancing what's good for you, what's good for the game, what's good for the players.
Okay. Cool. All right, just a few more questions here. This was another one I was thinking of, or actually came up in a game, and then I was thinking of it more. Was during the Lost at Sea game, one of the players wanted to use their modern scientific knowledge of like a condensation catcher to make fresh water while they're out at sea and they're low on fresh water supplies.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the question there is that fair to bring in your own scientific understanding to a fantasy world where presumably it's like more primitive and stuff like that? So that's kind of question one. And then I was spending time thinking about that more, and all of a sudden I remembered that in Minecraft. So Minecraft has a fantasy feel to it. It's got swords and armor and stuff like that. And I remembered that they have that redstone, and people use redstone as an on-off switch, and they literally build computers in Minecraft that can do
Mm-hmm.
pretty sophisticated stuff. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, well, there's magic in D&D, and maybe you could theoretically build some sort of redstone switch in D&D. So could you have like you go into a dwarven city and there's literally a computer essentially there, giant stone computer with switches and stuff. Like, so I was kind of taking it to that extreme. Like, could that theoretically? I mean, of course it can be in a fantasy world if you want it to be there. But I guess the broader question is, how do you feel like there's a limit to how much knowledge we have now that you can bring into your world, and could that ruin it maybe, or
I think there's no limits. I think that it comes back to that should be a difficulty check. That's so.
yeah.
Uh, the novelty of D&D is that the players and the DM bring this knowledge. It's you gave an extreme case,
Mm-hmm.
but how is that different from my bringing my knowledge of hero's journey and monomyth and some writing topics to the world
Hmm.
and building a story or a one shot off of those.
Yeah.
Or how is that different from, anybody contributing? Those ideas have to come from somewhere,
Hmm.
right? And whether or not they fit into the world. Now, you as a DM you do have veto power
Hmm.
to, to do some things like that. Um, you do want to be careful about that you're not just vetoing everyone's ideas, but um, I have some very creative people playing in my Humblewood campaign, and they want to try all kinds of stuff.
Hmm.
Uh, and I every once in a while I'm just like, that doesn't exist in this setting, what you're
Hmm.
talking about.
Yeah.
uh, and so I do sometimes have to play the veto card. But if it's something like a process or science type stuff, I would say, well, think about your character. Are they going to know this kind of stuff?
Hmm.
If it's super, if your world is super gritty and doesn't involve a lot of engineering type things, then what you can say, if they can say the justification for my character is that he studied in this university in the faraway land that has different technology,
Hmm.
and yeah, he might know this stuff. You could say, okay, roll intelligence or history or something like that, and then you as the DM can come up with the difficulty check for that. And if you think it's way out there and extravagant, it's perfectly fine to have a DC of 30
Hmm.
or 40 or something.
Yeah.
Or if you want to say, you know what, I I'll allow it under, if you can get really lucky on this and just give it a DC of 20.
Hmm.
Yeah, they have a 1 in 20 chance of this working out. Um, or if you just want to say, yeah, go for it, then you can do that too. It's up to you as the DM.
Hmm.
I again, finding opportunities for players to roll dice. Put a dice roll, even if you're going to allow it either way. Even if you're going to
Hmm.
say, well, DC is 1, right? um, let them roll the dice because you don't have to tell them the DC.
Hmm. Cool. Yeah, I kind of want to spend a little more time looking up some of the Minecraft videos on that redstone. I want to see if there's like a certain spell or something that sort of would operate in a similar way. Because I
Sure.
actually, after when I was thinking about it, I was like, oh, that's actually kind of cool. Like, it's kind of a cool concept to think. Like, your adventurers are exploring. They go into some faraway like dwarven city, and they go down in a big cavern, and there's this massive like stone computer or something they use for. I don't even know what it would
Sure.
really be used for, but
Well, and you can homebrew your own stuff too. You
yeah,
can write your own spells. Um,
true. Yeah, yeah.
it doesn't even need to be inspired or based on something that exists or that's been published. That's one thing that I haven't done much of. I've never homebrewed a spell because that's more of a player thing.
Hmm.
So I haven't really dabbled in that. I did make an NPC once that had sort of a group suggestion spell
Hmm.
where because the suggestion spell I think is targeted at an individual, as it's written in the published material. But I wanted this NPC to be basically hypnotize the whole group and
Hmm.
and and suggest to them certain things.
Yeah.
So that's the one instance where I've actually homebrewed any kind of magic, but people do that all the time.
Hmm.
They invent whole magic systems.
Yeah. 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 I've also done that in pretty limited ways. Like, I think only with NPC bosses I've come up with some. Either they used the spell but it had slightly different consequences, like exactly like you said, like changing suggestion to hit multiple people or something like that.
You just reminded me. So I take it back. There was a second time I did this. I had a B-Bag, a boss monster that was a snowman, and I gave him a spell that I wrote called Let It Go.
Nice. What did it do?
He would just yell out and roar, "Let it go," and everyone would have to roll a dexterity saving throw, or drop their weapon in the snow.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So
How did it play out?
it played out really well because I wrote it so that if you saved one time, the DC would be higher next time.
Hmm.
And eventually they were perpetually just dropping all of their stuff. And I would have them, because it's like falling into this heavy fluffy snow, they would take an action to like go and pick it up again.
Hmm.
um and eventually, and the snowman, he didn't hit very hard. He was just a big bag of hit points.
Yeah.
But it was just, again, for the story, the party was reduced to bare knuckle punching a snowman to death.
That's
Which was
awesome.
a lot of fun.
Yeah. Um, okay, last question here before we close up. Okay, so let me see how to frame this. A let's take a movie or a book. They sort of they consist of a lot of interconnected like scenes or chapters that flow nicely through together in a single story. There's start, finish, and very rarely, if ever, I think, good movies and good books will just have like a chapter or a scene where the adventurer goes off and then like there's just a dead end or like nothing happens. It didn't really provide any real value to the story. And then there's D&D, which in a sense I feel like we want to do that, but it's also a real like living breathing world, which means that there are dead ends. There are things that your players can do that do provide no value to the real story. And I've had players mention stuff like that. Like they do something in the world and they're like, "Whoa, that was pointless." They'll say something like that. Usually it's like in a joking way, but as a DM, I'm sort of hearing that and going like, I don't know, maybe it's just like an insecurity on my part or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, like in terms of like it's fair, right? It's a real world, and if they take action in it that doesn't really relate to the story, that I think that dead ends and things like that are totally fair. Do you agree?
Sure. Yeah. It's their fault. They chose to go off on the dead end.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. It's um
Yep.
particularly in campaigns. So in a one shot, it's a little different.
Okay.
In a one shot, part of that social contract is that everyone's coming with the expectation to play a one shot. You called it a one shot at the beginning. You said you'd be starting at this time, you'd be ending by the end of the night.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that expectation. And part of making that happen is that the DM should be allowed the license to railroad to an extent,
Mm-hmm.
particularly at the beginning. So if
Right.
you start off your one shot and you're a player, and the DM says this NPC comes up to you and gives you a quest, however that happens, you take it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there is that sort of trust that, one, the NPC isn't backstabbing you, or if he is, it's part of the one shot and it's intentional. You're supposed to take that backstab
Mm-hmm.
and get on with the adventure. That kind of railroading is expected in a one shot, particularly at the beginning. Also, if you find yourself trying to go off script in a one shot and the DM just says, and suddenly there was a wall, or
Yep.
something like
Yep.
video games do this all the time. How many invisible walls have you walked into in a video game? And it's just like, and the game's just like, sorry, that's the end of the map.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
That happens all the time. So that is totally allowed, and particularly in a one shot.
Mm-hmm.
In a campaign, the expectations are changed a little bit. You can still do that kind of stuff to an extent. More often than not, though, if the players want to go off script and do something, or do something that you haven't prepared for at all, it's going to be 100% improv, and you have no clue what you're doing. If it's towards the end of the session, I'll say, well, let's if you want to go this direction, let's call it here. and I'll just be blunt and say, I don't have anything for this.
Mhm.
And we can do that. And sometimes they'll say, well, okay, then let's go in a different direction,
Mhm.
just to play some more. Uh, that's totally okay. Again, everyone's just there to have fun. So I think that it is okay to have things in there that are not necessarily part of the script.
Yeah.
That again, that in turn also plays into you if you're running published content, something, or even your own homebrew. If
Mhm.
there is a main quest line, main story, um, players who deviate from that drastically can make a ton of work for you.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I'm starting to see one thing I've noticed as sort of a trend in the published content is we're seeing a lot less XP systems.
Mhm.
This may seem like a tangent, but I'm going to tie it in just in a second
Okay.
here.
Yep.
When you do milestone, it's tied generally to a milestone, a
Mhm.
point in the story.
Yeah.
Players get to city X and they level up. And something that I've always done milestones. I've been a big proponent of milestones. And what'll happen sometimes is players will go off and do side quest type stuff or stuff that's my own homebrew. Maybe I put it in there intentionally just to enrich the story.
Mhm.
And then sessions in, they're just like, we haven't leveled up in 8 sessions. What the heck?
Mhm.
And one thing that I do to manage that is I say, we're in a campaign, we're in a world. You can go wherever you want, pick a direction.
Mhm.
And it might be improv, it might be on topic. If you're going down what feels like the main story quest, then you're going to hit those milestones quicker.
Mhm.
In fact, I think I have the Humblewood book right here. So you can see there's like these sticky notes.
Mhm.
Those are where in the book, in the campaign, that my players level up.
Mhm. Yep.
So level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. And I show them this and I say, when you hit these points, then you level up. And
Mhm.
those are the milestones. And they're preset in the published content. But then because we homebrew a lot and because they're super creative and come up with other stuff or they get curious and say, let's go over that mountain and see what's over there.
Mhm.
We go off on a lot of tangents. And so I use those opportunities to enrich the story, to give them more stuff. If there's like a magic weapon that I want or a magic item that I want to give them, they're
Mhm.
more likely, if it's my homebrew stuff, they're more likely to get it when they're not on the main quest line.
Mhm.
But it's going to take them longer to level up. And
Yeah.
so they have that incentive to try and stay on track, which is beneficial for me because it's a lot easier to run stuff out of a book, right?
Yeah.
It's
Definitely.
all the work's been done for me. So they're incentivized to stay on the main quest line and to hit those milestones to level up and see that character progression. But then they're also encouraged to go and explore still
Mhm.
because they might find something cool. And then sometimes they'll just do something completely off the wall. And I'm like, I got nothing for you. Here's 10 gold.
Yeah.
So,
Have you ever
um,
thought? Have you ever thought about switching off milestone to? I don't think I don't think any of it's official, but like I know people have developed more complicated XP systems where it's not just monster kills. It's like monster kills, but you also get XP for maybe like successful role playing encounters and things where you kind of predefine it the best you can because those are hard to sort of quantify. But have you ever considered anything like that?
not at all.
Okay.
It's to me, it's all about the story, and you know, them leveling up. All that means to me as a DM is now I've got to go make everything tougher.
Yeah.
So, um, If it were up to me, we would pick one level and just be that level the whole time.
Yeah.
But I see that players like that level up experience. They like that kind of stuff. The arguments generally in favor of XP is, oh well, they if the players know that they're likely to reach that threshold next session, then they'll go prep for something like that. And I counter that with, if they're coming up on a sticky note,
Hmm.
I tell them and I say, in the next session or two, you are likely to hit the next sticky note. So have your plan figured out
Hmm.
for how are you going to take a proficiency um, or a new spell or what? Figure that out.
Hmm. Cool. Yeah, I've mostly relied on, just by default, the XP system. There's been a few cases where, like, I personally felt like the players, not so much in the newbie groups, but in like personal games with friends and stuff that I've run, where we've done long term campaigns, where I was like, yeah, I would just give them maybe some XP or just give them the next level, because I'm like, I felt like they had done so much stuff despite maybe
Mm-hmm.
not killing a lot of high value enemies, that they just like deserved it based on all that they had gone through, you know. So I've mostly relied on XP, but done a little bit of hybrid in a way,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been interested in expanding a little, expanding my mind and in exploring the some possible more complicated XP systems.
Have you looked at the Icewind Dale book that just came out?
No, not yet.
It is exclusively milestone.
Oh, okay.
When you look at it, it says character advancement, and it'll tell you when the players get to this town, because it's in 10 towns.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to this town, then you hit level 2. When you get to this place, level 3. When you get to this point in the story, level something.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing that I noticed, and I've seen other uh, D&D content reviewers on YouTube call this out. They're like, there's no XP here. It does not matter. And what's
Hmm.
interesting is that they say, there's all this other stuff. There's actually in the text, it's like, once you've done X, Y, and Z, you level up, you can continue to stay here and do more stuff. And that might improve your relationship with the people of 10 towns. But it goes no, it does nothing for your leveling up. You do not level up until this event.
Yeah.
Like, it says that. And I'm just like, that blew me away, because I've always been a fan of milestones, but here I'm seeing an example where they wrote the book in such a way that it is straight up milestones.
Yeah, because in previous books, it's always been a choice, right? Like they said you
Mm-hmm.
could use
Yeah.
the XP or milestone system.
Humblewood is the same thing. Where all these sticky notes are, there's a block in there on that page that says, killing this or completing this battle, you're going to get this much XP. Or if you're using milestones, then you'll level up here. So
Mm-hmm.
it gives you the choice in a lot of books. But now I'm seeing more and more content that is exclusively milestone.
Interesting. All right. Well, that was that. We just did hour and 45 minutes. Looks like that was pretty.
I
That was
told you we
fun.
could go on for a while.
Yeah, I wasn't really sure what to expect, so that's awesome. So before we close it out, I wanted to do just kind of a fun sort of like building David's character sheet in D&D. What kind of how do you see yourself? What race, class, alignment, background would you be in the world if you could be in a fantasy world? And again, as I sort of described it earlier, it is sort of a true representation of you, but maybe also an idealized version. For instance, I would probably choose I wouldn't choose human. I think I'd be more fun to be like a wood elf or something like that. Druid. I love the kind of being out in the nature and stuff like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
what about you? What do you think?
This one's tricky because it's super tempting to just describe one of the players or one of the characters that I've played as a player,
Mm-hmm.
because we do tend to kind of project ourselves a little bit when we create characters. Not always, but
Yeah.
sometimes. I think sticking with me, just IRL, David.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would probably not be some kind of protagonist or hero or adventurer. I would be an NPC, in some town. I could see myself being a dwarf.
Okay.
Um, and yet being a dwarf, I would be kind of, I have that kind of architect personality, uh, in terms of Myers-Briggs, like
Mm-hmm.
I like to see the top level picture, see the big picture, work with people and things and systems in order to build a bigger whole.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could see myself as maybe kind of running a town or a small portion of a city.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not necessarily like a politician that's super charismatic, but more of the kind of mastermind subclass of rogue.
Okay.
Uh, Um,
Interesting. All right.
Nuts, and with that, I could be a villain. I could be a Moriarty. That would be cool.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
um, I don't. I think naturally, I don't have. I'm not necessarily an evil aligned person. IRL. I like to think so, at least. Um, but I would be kind of that stone cold, logical dwarf that's running society. He's dealing with real world, everyday problems. Probably isn't too trusting
Mm-hmm.
of the PCs, the adventurers,
Mm-hmm.
but still willing to kind of hire occasional mercenaries to take care of stuff around the settlement.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I could see myself being kind of like that, kind of a high end, decently high charisma, but not in an outgoing way.
Mm-hmm.
um, Weak strength and weak constitution. I don't necessarily get to the gym much, so
All right, cool. And what's your preferred weapon if you have to go into combat? You've got to deal with something by yourself. What are you taking into combat?
um, I don't see myself as being a magic user in
Okay.
any way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would see myself as kind of standing in the back, not even necessarily using a bow or arrow or throwing anything, more as being sort of the general, instructing things, and then um, uh, when stuff gets within range, using the environment. This is an idea that I explored with a rogue,
Mm-hmm.
a swashbuckler rogue that I built, game a while back that I really liked. And I kind of feel like this would be kind of my way of doing things, is that more of the bar brawler type, not necessarily bare fist, but the kind of guy that would sit in the back, wait for an opportunity moment, and then reach for a wine bottle and smash it over someone's head.
All right. Cool. Cool.
So
So yeah, that's like yeah, using the environment like an improvised weapons and things like that. Surprising your enemies.
yeah, yeah, improvised weapon. There's a whole in Humblewood actually. There's a whole feat or subclass. I think it's a subclass that
Mm-hmm.
is built around that, which I really, really like.
Okay.
I didn't get to. I think it's a subclass of fighter though.
Mm-hmm.
So I had already started that game as a rogue, and if that game had continued, it was someone else running it that I was a player in, and if it had continued, I would have multi-classed into fighter just to get that
Mm-hmm.
because it had a whole system, a progression system for getting better at wielding chair legs and
That's awesome. Yeah, that would be a fascinating character to have in your party in a story.
yeah, no
Um,
magic, nothing special, not particularly dexterous either.
mhm.
Just being sort of the comical Jackie Chan, pulling rugs and
Yeah, yeah, that's
just
awesome.
very strategic in the bar brawl chaos.
Yeah. So based on that character description, then what are some of the top 5e skills that you feel like you would be relying on most?
I think, I think, so I mentioned that he wouldn't necessarily be the typical dexterous rogue type, but I think dexterity would be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think you would probably still want a decent amount of constitution, even though that doesn't necessarily match me IRL.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and kind of the rest would be, I could see this being a sort of a charisma, like a charisma dexterity sort of build.
Okay.
I don't necessarily know without going into the spells and what that affects, but just given the character, like the raw character, I could see them building off of their ability to just insight check everything
Mm-hmm.
and kind of see who's going to do what, where do I need to be to make the biggest amount of bang.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Okay, well, first off, thanks, David, for your time in doing this, spending a
Thanks.
couple
Thanks for
hours out of
having
your
me.
Sunday. I really appreciate it. Do you have anything you want to share in terms of social media, or where people could find you, have a chat with you, anything that you want to shout out?
I'm not too big on social media. I think, for the most part, I'm off busy either writing or running games.
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, there's not a whole lot of value to be on, Facebook or anything like that. But
Mm-hmm.
I do spend a decent amount of time, at least reading everything that's in the newbie sessions server.
Yep.
That's probably the easiest way to find me. I still run kind of mid-month on a more or less monthly basis the my own newbie session.
Mm-hmm.
I am looking at something that you and I had talked about some time ago, is doing kind of a one-shot writing workshop
Yeah.
as a meetup. I
Mm-hmm.
still don't know what that looks like exactly in my head, but I've been thinking about that quite a bit and kind of jotting down some ideas. I have kind of my QA list, or my process for writing a one shot from scratch or from inspiration, and
Yeah.
trying to canonize that into maybe a set of slides that could be shared, and then just walking people through as I live, maybe do a one shot, or at least write out the first draft, and encourage people to write along their own one shots, and then maybe we trade at the end or something like that. But
Mm-hmm.
that's an idea that I've got in the works,
Mm-hmm.
and it might show up on the meetup group as well. We'll see.
Okay.
Um, that's other than that, I mean, I'm pretty tied up with my own stuff, but if you've got DM questions or want to chat or something like that, probably go into the newbie sessions Discord. It's the best plan.
Cool. Yeah, so for anyone watching, especially if you're not familiar, you can head over to dndnewbies.com. All the information there. The Discord server is right near the top of the website. So yeah, if you want to get in touch with David, see if he'll run a game for you or join one of his newbie sessions, that's where you could find it, in the Discord server or via one of the meetup groups. And keep me posted if you want to run that event, because one thing, especially that sort of event, isn't necessarily location based, like
Right.
how the meetup groups are structured. So we can actually, similar to how I did the DM training program, we could post it in literally all 6 of the groups, because
Right.
everyone just ends up in the same spot anyway. Cool. Well, yeah, thanks again. Thanks for everyone that either watched the live stream or watched the VOD later, either on Twitch or YouTube. That is everything. If you want, you can follow the Twitch channel or subscribe to the YouTube to get notifications and things like that. If you haven't checked out D&D Newbie Sessions, go do that. That's dndnewbies.com. You don't have to necessarily be a new player. You can be experienced. We're just looking for people that are friendly and welcoming and patient, that they don't mind sitting through some questions being asked and people getting kind of sorted out and stuff like that. So if that's you, feel free to join, even if you're experienced. And then lastly, I have to start doing this, even though it makes me feel weird to do, but I do have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/D&D Newbies if you want to support the work here, the games being run, the DMs being trained, new one-shots. All of your support is ultimately just goes right back into running this stuff and covering expenses like Astral Pro and the website and the meetup.com fees, which are actually pretty expensive. And then a quick shout out to my current patrons, Flowers, Steven, Kayla, Pat, Cameron, and Cithero. I love you guys. Thank you so much for supporting me. And I think that's it. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again, David, and I'll talk to you online.
Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll see you all around.
Cool. Thanks everyone. See ya.